afternoon. Thank you for connecting with the Pennsylvania Game Commission today. My name is Brittany Howell, and my colleague Lori and I will be managing this session. We're fortunate to be joined today by Jason Dukoski, the Assistant Director of the Bureau of Wildlife Protection for the Pennsylvania Game Commission. He will be talking to us about woodland survival skills. We expect the presentation to last about 20 minutes, followed by a question and answer period of about 10 minutes. You can ask a question by typing into the Type Question Here box on the GoToWebinar control panel at the right of your screen. You can also use that box now to let us know if the audio is coming through okay. For those of you dialing in to listen by phone, please note that this is not a toll-free call and you may receive long-distance charges from your service provider. Without further ado, I'll turn it over to our presenter, Jason. Would you like to share a little bit about your background before we get started?
Yes. Once again, my name is Jason Dukoski. I am the Assistant Bureau Director of our Bureau of Wildlife Protection. Just a little bit of background for me. I did have some woodland survival training in the military, Bridgeport, California, Mountain Warfare School. Other than that, I do enjoy hiking and camping in the woods and have attended several different classes on survival in the woods. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and start our woodland survival presentation. This is going to be based on cold weather environments. So let's continue. Okay, what is a survival situation? It's always unplanned, not necessarily unprepared though. And I'm hoping this presentation helps you prepare better for those unplanned events. A survival situation may or may not be life-threatening, and it's usually a short-term, less than 48 hours, probably no longer than 24 hours. Now, this is assuming that you have no communications and you're wearing the appropriate clothing for the weather. Survival situations, some of them are caused by immersion, such as you fall into a pond or a lake. Illness or injury, they're the #1 causes of survival situation. Inexperience or poor planning, gear needs or gear failure, bad weather, a vehicle accident or a breakdown, or you just get lost during hunting season or on a day hike. So we understand that the causes. So now let's start trying to understand how we can not get lost. One of the basic ways of not getting lost would be understanding or using a map and compass. And the other ones would be noting the terrain features, landmarks such as radio, cell phone towers, windmills, mountain peaks, creeks or rivers. Always look behind you. It'll give you a different point of view. If you have to return or you're following your tracks back out, everything will look a little bit familiar if you're constantly looking behind you. Like I said, it gives you a different angle. Leave sign. There's multiple ways of leaving sign in the woods. Surveyor's tape. And if you use this type of sign, please remember to take it out of the woods. Other signs that you can leave, breaking branches and sticking them straight up and down in the ground, stacking rocks, or even shuffling your feet in a leaf litter. Once you shuffle your feet in a leaf litter, if you walk a couple yards, turn around and look, and you'll see the coloration of the ground is different than the undisturbed earth. So that's just some basic things on trying to find your way back. Now, we talked about the map and compass. There are a lot of good books on map reading and compass use, and I would suggest looking into those. It's kind of a lost art, and if the less you use, the less you remember of using it, especially the compass. So the big thing there is practice, practice, practice. Compass work will save you 9 times out of 10. Compared to the other option, which would be the GPS, you need to always make sure you carry batteries with those. They do eat up a lot of batteries. The GPSs with the antennas that stick out from the GPS tend to work better in forested environments versus the GPSs that have the antennas internally. The big thing with GPSs that I find with a lot of students is that they forget to take the batteries out of them, and then they put them away and they don't get them out for a year or two, and then they go to use them, and the battery corroded inside it, and it renders the GPS unusable. But just like the map and compass, you need to practice with those to become proficient. You want to make sure you're easy to find. Tell someone where you're going and when you expect to return. Now this is the next one is key for our hunters. Actually go where you tell them that you're going. A lot of times that we talk to our hunters that are lost, they said that they were in a general area, but then they saw, or they either tracked or saw deer sign and wandered off in a different direction. And then the people that were looking for them, they couldn't find them. So just remember, actually go where you tell them that you're going to go. Another thing is, it's somewhat new on our game lands that if you park in a game land parking lot, a lot of our parking lot gates have numbers on them. You know, in your scouting time that you're going out hunting, make sure you record the gates that you're at or where you plan on parking. That will help our officers with the possible search for you later on. That way we know where to start because we know where you're parked at because that gate has a number to it. The other thing is carry signal devices such as a mirror, whistle, flashlight, flare, or even be able to create a fire. As you can see in this slide, you know, she's being prepared by making sure her friends know where she's going to go and who she's going to be back and what time she's expected to be back. As I said previously, you can add to that if it's a state game lands and you know what parking lot you're going to be at. Look for that gate number and record that gate number. And the big thing is go where you're telling your people that you're going to be located at. So, survival basics. The number one is stay dry. You want to, you know, the proper clothing, shelter, cold weather. You want to try to avoid sweating. The big thing with that is you don't want to get wet and then you can't get warm again. Work at half speed, and that includes, you know, we all like to walk fast to get to our location to beat out, you know, other hunters or just get to a location quicker so that we're there ready for whenever the game comes. If you work at half speed, you won't sweat, but if you're running to get to a location, you're going to sweat. And a lot of the clothing that our hunters wear are not the best wicking clothing. So even wicking clothing is hard to get warm in. So just keep that in mind. Whenever you're working in cold weather, just work at half speed. Stay warm, and that's through your clothing, shelter, fire. And sources of heat loss, radiation, evaporation, convection, and conduction. Just keep that in mind. Whenever you're laying or sitting on the ground, your body temperature is evaporating off you, and it's actually getting conducted into the ground below you. So you're going to have a lot higher heat loss than you would if you were standing. So stay safe, make good decisions. Illness, injury complicates situation immeasurably. Don't make self-rescue unrealistic. One of the points here is if you're going across a field that looks like it's an open field and snow, like 2 feet of snow, you don't know what's under that field. Is it a pond that you're going to be crossing? So you got to make the good decisions. Take your time, read the terrain, and if you are in a survival situation, don't put yourself in a situation that makes your rescuers have an issue getting to you, making it unrealistic. Give yourself the best odds. Make sure you're close to an open field that if you have to, you can make that fire or signal to get the rescuers to your location. Okay, common injuries, illnesses. All right, these are pretty simple. Blisters, dehydration, knife cuts on your hands, wrist injuries, ankle, knee. You know, as we're walking, hiking, you fall, stumble, it's usually your ankle, knee, or even your wrist that get injured. Burns from the fire, insect bites, especially during the late spring, early summer. Any type of irritant or eye, lacerations such as getting struck in the eye by a branch that snaps back on you, or diarrhea in case you do drink water. Now, these are the more serious common injuries. Hypothermia, and this is basically from exposure and immersion to the weather. Trauma, internal bleeding, broken bones, and shock. They kind of go hand in hand. If you fall off a cliff or if you fall down a cave, that's when the life-threatening injuries are more serious, of course, and we need to get you out sooner than later. So just keep that in mind whenever you're walking around and you're by yourself. Just take it a little bit easy. Lightning and infection caused by a previous injury that you can't keep clean or dry. Okay, food. Okay, everybody worries about food whenever they go out. Basically, in a short-term survival situation, we're not too worried about food. Typically 1,500 calories a day to sustain the average person. And we can go 3 weeks without eating. The big thing about if you're going to be eating, you need to drink. So if you have food but you have no water, I would suggest going without the food for as long as you can. Water's more important. You can go up to 3 days without it in moderate weather. Warm weather, you usually burn through 2 liters a day, and depending on how warm that weather is, it could be more. It's also important in cold weather. Just breathing in and out, you lose water. So, and you lose the water in perspiration, respiration, and of course urination. Conserve water and energy. And remember, work at half speed, especially during the winter time. Okay, for your survival kit, everybody asks what they should have in a survival kit. You know, they see the newest, greatest thing on TV. So you break it down as must-haves versus nice-to-have. Okay, must-haves. Think of the basics. You want to stay dry, you want to be warm, and you want to be safe. So in that instance, fire. You want to have at least 2 methods of fire. Never leave this to chance because you want to always have the ability to create a fire. You can go to any local gas station and get one of the little big lighters, 99 cents. That's one of them. The other one, if you want to have a striker or hurricane matches or waterproof matches, whatever you want to call them, you always want to have at least 2 methods of fire. Shelter, and a lot of my trainings, we just use a plastic sheet, which is basically like a drop cloth that you use for painting. The plastic sheet, you want to make sure it's clear, and I'll get over that. I'll cover that in a little bit. A plastic bag, a browse bag, basically, this is what you're going to use to gather up your materials for bedding. A space blanket, and 550 cord or paracord. Those individuals that are listening that were in the military, they understand what that is. Parachute cord. Miscellaneous, you want to have a good knife. I always recommend a locking knife, or even better, a straight edge knife. Locking knives tend to have the mechanical release go bad on them, and they can close on you. You want to have a light source. The best light source would probably be a headlamp. Ziploc bags. Ziploc bags, you can actually use it to put all the other stuff inside that Ziploc bag, but with Ziploc bags, you can use it to gather in a winter survival type of situation, snow, where you can melt it over top the fire by leaving it in a Ziploc bag and hanging it from a branch above the fire. Plus, you can use it to gather other water, like in the summertime, and bring it back to have it boiled. And of course, you can put your medications in it. And depending on what your planning is, if you have room, I would pack water. That's just my basic kit that I throw in my backpack, and I can fit all of that inside that Ziploc bag that's folded. The wood there is what I use for my tinder. That's just basically fat wood, and there's a black bicycle tube that holds that all in. If need be, I can burn that black bicycle tube, and whenever you burn rubber, it creates a black smoke. And that's key for survival situations in wintertime. You don't want to burn something that you need to signal with white smoke, because the ground's probably going to be covered in snow, and your rescuers won't be able to see that. The three little wadded up things, they are what we call a PJ ball. It's a petroleum jelly cotton ball. And all you do is take some petroleum jelly and rub it on a cotton ball. You don't want it so wet that you can't catch a spark, but you want it so that you can pull it apart and you can see the little fibers of the cotton. That's what I use whenever I light. I have that sparker there in the orange, and then of course my big lighter there. But if I was to spark that cotton ball would catch it, and it should burn for 3 minutes. That gives me time to get the other tinder on it. Of course, I have my knife up there and a space blanket. And the 550 cord is that black cord with the 7 strands of white string hanging out, and then there's my drop cloth. Okay, these are the nice to haves. They're not necessarily needed for a survival kit, but they will make it a lot easier, make it more a comfort issue and efficiency. A saw or a machete, I would say if I had a choice between both of those, I would go with the saw. Machete takes a lot more work to cut through branches. A saw, you can use the sawdust to throw on your fire, and it's just a lot more packable. Kindling kit, like I said earlier, I have that fat wood, and I hold that together with a bicycle tire, but duct tape burns too. So usually kindling kit's a little container that you put a bunch of different kindlings, like birch bark, grapevine bark. You can put that in there, or any other type of bark that you know lights very easily and you can keep it dry. Put it in a container and just wrap some wraps of duct tape on the outside. Like I said, duct tape's always nice to have to repair the plastic that you're going to be sleeping in, or even to start a fire or signal. Maybe even a minimalist first aid kit with insect repellent, especially in the summertime. Mosquitoes are pretty bad at night. Even though if it's a survival situation, chances are you're not going to be sleeping a lot anyway. Heavy duty aluminum foil, writing paper, pencil, pen, whistle, compass, both of those are good signaling devices. Metal cup, that gives you something to boil water in to make sure it's safe to drink. Extra clothing, hat, socks. I always carry extra socks because it seems like my feet are always the first things to get wet. Flagging for finding your way back from where you came. Zip ties, again, that's for repairing certain things. Water treatment filter, signal mirror, high energy foods. And then you can put that all in a pack. But like I said, everybody has their different ideas on what they need to make their time in the woods more comfortable. Just take these in, for instance, these are nice to haves, but they aren't the must haves. Okay, your shelter. Your shelter, you want to make sure your shelter, you want to make sure provides adequate rest. Like I said earlier, you're probably not going to get a lot of sleep. If you get 2 to 3 hours, you're doing good. You want to make sure it protects you from the weather, and you can maintain heat in the cold weather. And the types of shelter that I'll cover here are basically the string, and I'll add the debris shelter. That seems fairly easy to do with minimal equipment in the winter landscape. But the half dome, super shelter, and even a trash bag poncho, basically that's a trash bag, just like it says, and you pop a hole in it and put your head out it and put 2 holes in it for your arms, and you sit next to the fire there. So if you're looking for a good place to set your shelter, you want to make sure the site selection's key. You don't want it on top of the mountain, and you don't want it at the bottom of a ravine, because the top is usually the windiest, and at the bottom of the ravine is usually the coldest. So you want to find a place that's mid-slope, preferably south-facing. North-facing usually gets the sun the last and for the least amount of daylight. Natural materials available. You want to make sure there's fuel around. So fuel for your fire. shelter construction, you want to make sure that the wood that is around is not dead or decaying. Bedding, you want to make sure you can find leaf litter, or even if it's in a field, grass or something like that, that you can make a bedding out of it. Possibly water. The big thing is, if you're in the woods, you want to make sure there's no overhead dangers, usually broken off limbs that are high up in the tree. You don't want to be under that tree, and that night you get a pretty good windstorm and it blows those branches down onto you. You want to make sure you get plenty of bedding. This is going to be the insulator layer between you and the ground. This is the most labor intensive part of the shelter building. And when you think you have enough bedding, go back and get more, because throughout the course of the night, you might have 8 inches of bedding, and whenever you wake up, you'll be down to about 3 inches. And if you're lucky, you'll still be off the ground, but sometimes you do work your way through that bedding and you're going to be right against the ground. And as I said earlier, the ground's going to absorb all your heat and you're going to be cold. And this is just an example of a string shelter. You can see they used some type of hay or field grass for their bedding. The string shelter there is, if you look closely on the tree, you can see the 550 cord is wrapped around it, and it's what's holding up the plastic tarp and the emergency blanket, which are tied together. The key thing is they're tied. They're not ripped or cut in any manner. If you were to cut those and you got rain that night, that rain would follow that 550 cord right down that the cord into your shelter, and it'd be dripping on you all night. So basically, the 550 cord not only helps in that matter by allowing you not to have to cut the material, but it also allows you to keep it at a certain distance off the ground. You don't want your shelter too high, because that makes more area for you to heat. The closer that emergency blanket is to you, the warmer that shelter will be. And that's just a picture of the same shelter at night. The thing with this picture is the fire in front, and you have that backing behind the fire that's helping reflect that heat back into the shelter. Now earlier I said the drop cloth needs to be clear. If that shelter was made out of a black garbage bag material, a lot of that radiant heat would not come back into that shelter. But since it's clear, it's going through and hitting that space blanket behind it and radiating that heat down onto the person. A debris shelter is exactly how it sounds. You want to have a strong enough spine or main log that you can lean up other logs against that, and almost like a TP fashion, work that the whole way back. Depending on how you want to lay in there is where you want the wider part at. Usually the portion that's sloped downwards is the area that you put your feet in, and then your head would be out towards, I guess in this case, out towards the right of the debris shelter. So if you look on the left there, that's the backbone of the debris shelter. And on the right is after you add all the debris to it, leaf litter, other sticks, even pine tree branches, anything that you can find to insulate you from the wind and from the elements. That's the basic debris shelter. And this is just another debris shelter. This one was worked on a lot more. You can see the firewood. You can never have enough firewood. You always want to have more than what you think is enough. You can see the firewood still stacked up and ready to go. And in this case, the student or the person that's using this is probably out looking for more firewood to get them through the night. Okay, fire building, tools and methods. Methods of ignition, and as I said earlier, you always want to have a backup to the primary. Butane lighter, and a backup could be waterproof matches or a sparker. If you're using a sparker, make sure you practice with it. A lot of them come with the material, the protectant on the sparker itself, So it takes a couple tries before you actually start to see sparks coming off of it. Tinder, there's a couple different types of tinder, natural or improvised. I'll go over natural in the next slide, but improvised in my previous slide had pictures of the petroleum jelly balls, duct tape, and bike tube. And of course, there's commercial products out there that you can get that are more wax-based for your tinder. Kindling, as I said earlier, the natural birch bark, grapevine bark, dry leaves, and small dry branches. Usually kindling's classified as branches that are about pencil size or smaller. Fat wood, or even a kindling kit. You can also find kindling in conifer trees. If you look inside the trees, there's a lot of dead branches, and they're all usually protected against the weather and elements. So even though it's wet outside, you still can find dry kindling if you look inside conifer branches and just break off the dead ones and use that for your kindling. Or there's even another method called batoning. If you have a 1 to 2 inch piece of wood that's soaking wet on the outside, if you take your knife and split that piece of wood down the center, it's going to be dry on the inside. So you can use that to lay up against your fire to get the fire going. The other thing about starting the fire and keeping your fire going, you want to build up in size. So you want to start with kindling, that pencil size branches, and then progress up from there. You want to go up to maybe 1 inch, or after you get it going, you got some good coal beds, then go ahead and go up to 2 inches, 3 inches, 4 inches, and so on. You don't want to start off with the largest piece of wood out there and put on the fire, because it's not going to take off. It's going to smolder and it might just die out. In order to get the most from your fire, a reflector. You want to have a reflector on the back side of the fire. It doesn't matter what that reflector is, as long as it reflects back into the area of the shelter. If it's wood, like big thick logs, yeah, they might catch on fire after a while and they'll smolder, but they're not right in the fire, but they'll still reflect. The other thing is you want a long, low fire. You don't want a big, high raging fire, because you're losing all that heat. It's going straight up. A long fire will keep the fire long, possibly as long as your shelter, if you're doing a string shelter, and it's low, so you're not losing a lot of heat. A lot of that heat could be radiate back into your shelter. Maintaining, you need to check it every 2 to 3 hours. And like I said, in a survival situation, you're not going to be doing a lot of sleeping. The other thing is you're going to be gathering firewood throughout the night too, so keep that in mind. This is just a fire of one of my co-instructors. He's doing a spark onto a PJ ball into kindling, and he's using for underneath that fire, it's either a rock or possibly even aluminum foil. You can use that to keep the fire off of the snow. That he is starting a fire, and he's probably going to make it a low fire there. This is another fire. It's been going on for a little bit, but you can see there is a reflector in the back, and it appears to be 2 big logs in the snow. And I guarantee you, whenever this student wakes up the next morning, all that snow is going to be gone, and that reflector will be half burnt, but they'll be plenty warm. Okay, water sources. Safe water. What do we think of safe water? It's atmospheric water. It's coming from the air, such as rain, dew, or fresh snow. Fresh snow needs to be melted and warmed. You don't want to put cold snow in your body and melt it in your mouth, because you're taking energy from your body to melt that snow. Water that needs treated: spring, groundwater, streams, river, ponds, lakes, etc. Any type of surface water should be treated. Treatment only removes biological contaminants, usually not chemical contaminants. We treat it through boiling, chemical treatment, or filtration. Okay, the picture on the left, that's a life straw. That would be a filter type of product. And on the right, those are just basically tabs that you drop in to kill germicidal bacteria in your water. We think of iodine. A lot of us in the military that had canteens would have to drop iodine in their water. Doesn't taste good, but it provides a service. Other ways of getting water while you're out, creating a solar water still. And if you remember, water is probably the primary thing if you can't go more than 3 days without it. These solar water stills work great, especially in a sand environment. Basically, you're digging a hole, probably about 2 feet deep. You're putting some type of container that you can gather the water. You're breaking branches of fresh vegetation and you're putting them down there along your container. Make sure they're not up and over the lip of your container. And then you're covering that hole with that clear drop cloth. And then you're making sure there's rocks around the edges. And then you want to take a small pebble and drop it in the center. Just make sure that pebble's right over top of your collection container. And over the night into the next morning, it'll break down the vegetation, and you'll get all that dew that's causing, that's evaporating and from the vegetation, and it's condensating on the plastic and then dripping down into your container. Like I said, this works great in a sand environment. The other thing is you need to be out in the open because the trees will really hamper your heat production in that. Some other ways, more elaborate ways of filtering water. As you can see, a lot of them deal with just taking dirty water and pouring it over different types of material to filter out big particles all the way down to the fine particles. The key thing here is the charcoal from your fire. So if you don't have a fire to start with, you're not going to be able to filter water. The one that I used in the service is the one on the right, basically layer grass, layer sand, and then charcoal, and then down. But it takes up a lot of material. You have to have clothing that will allow the water to go through it. So, all right, some of the supplies, survival supplies that I've used are listed here. By no way are these the only ones out there, but these are just the ones that I've been using. And you can find them at most local sporting goods stores. Probably the best is always the military. If you can get your hands on some of the military equipment, that works great. And then there's some sources there. By all means, that's not the end of the list of sources. So, but just want to leave you with a couple more things here. In Pennsylvania, it's unlikely a survival situation will last more than 24 hours. Be a weather watcher. Dress for prevailing conditions. Carry additional clothing for expected changes in conditions. Proper clothing is your first line shelter. Don't get lost. Understand how to use simple compass even without a map. It can give you a general direction, keep you walking in a straight line rather than circles. Don't rely on your smartphone or GPS. Be easy to find, mark your trail, leave sign, and carry a signal device such as a whistle, light, mirror, or build a fire. And the fire would be for smoke. Always tell a responsible person where you're going and when you expect to return. Think of the survival basics. Stay dry, stay warm, and stay safe. Don't make self-rescue unrealistic. Survival decisions should always be made to improve your situation, not risk making it worse. Conserve energy and water. Work at half speed. Avoid sweating in cold weather. Carry a primary means of starting a fire and at least one backup method. Don't leave this to chance. Starting and maintaining a fire is perhaps the most important skill for cold weather survival. Practice, practice, practice. Don't let a survival situation be the first time you try to build a fire under adverse conditions. Collect dry tinder as you find it. Don't wait until you need a fire to start looking for it. Even in wet condition, dry tinder can be found on the inner branches on conifer trees, underneath fallen trees, and by splitting larger pieces and exposing the dry wood inside. A clear plastic drop cloth, a space blanket, and some paracord make an inexpensive, lightweight, and very packable shelter. Natural bedding added to a shelter is necessary to prevent heat loss to the ground. A good fixed blade knife and a small headlamp are smart equipment to carry in your survival pack. A small folding saw makes collecting firewood easier and more efficient. Atmospheric water are generally safe to drink. Ground or surface water such as springs, streams, ponds, and lakes are suspect and should be purified before drinking. Gallon-sized Ziploc freezer bags can be used to collect and carry water. In the short term, it is better to be thirsty than to risk drinking bad water. Be prepared means anything will be unexpected, just unplanned. Alan Kay once said, if you stay ready, you don't have to get ready. So that concludes my class here. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will look forward to some questions coming.
All right. So the first question that we got was that you said that if you have food but you don't have water, that you should try to hold off on eating the food. They were curious why. Do you break down whenever you're breaking down the food, or are you using water?
Well, that's exactly why, because your body takes water or moisture to process that food. So if you can go without those 3 days without eating, because if you remember earlier, I said you can go up to 3 weeks without food. The key thing is the water. You can only go 3 days without water. So if you're going to eat, you're taking water that your body needs to survive for those 3 days.
Do the two methods of fire that you should always have with you have to be different methods, or would just 2 lighters suffice?
2 lighters will suffice. You got to keep in mind that if one breaks or if parts fall on it, I've had big lighters where they broke. The tops broke because the way my pack was. And whenever I put my pack down, another item came down and broke both lighters at the same time. No, just as long as you have 2 methods, I wouldn't carry them in the same location in your pack, but just so you have 2 methods, that would suffice.
How effective is regular camp charcoal compared to activated charcoal for water filtration?
Activated charcoal is by far more sterile and probably better to use, but I don't know how many people are going to pack that in. But camp charcoal will work just as fine.
What about the springs? Can you drink water straight out of a natural spring?
I would still filter it. I carry an inline filter on my camel pack, and whenever I put one Ziploc in to get the water and drink through that camel pack hose, I always filter it. Even though some springs directly out of the ground are safe, if you have a filter, if you have anything possible, I'd rather have them filter it, boil it, versus drinking right from the ground.
You hear about this sometimes on TV. In a dire situation, is sterile urine an option to drink?
It is, but keep in mind, I don't think you're going to have that problem in Pennsylvania. We have so many resources and so many incredible people in search and rescue. We have the National Guard that has thermal imaging. We have, state police have helicopters. I don't believe it'll come to that point, but that is a possibility. More or less, you hear about that in like saltwater situations when someone's stuck on a raft out in the middle of the ocean.
Is a mountain or a valley a warmer spot to put your camp?
Okay, you want to stay away from the valleys because that's where all the cold air seems to accumulate. So a mountain on a south-facing slope would be warmer because you're getting most of the sun throughout the day versus a north slope. But you don't want to be at the very top of that mountain because it is windy. So that's why we always say try to stay mid-slope. But if you can stay out of the valley, I would suggest staying out of the valley.
Is it more important to stay put or to try to find your way back out?
By all means, I would stay put. You don't want to put someone else's life in jeopardy of trying to look for you, and you constantly are moving. You want to use that fire for your benefit. If you can make a fire on the edge of the forest or in a field, that way when you hear someone going over top of you, you can signal with that fire, or even drag debris out in the middle of the field and write SOS with the debris. You want to have those letters at least 15 feet long and about 5 feet wide. That way they can see it from about 3,000 feet up.
What's a reasonable amount of weight for a survival kit?
You probably could do a survival kit for under 3 pounds. My survival kit, it's under a pound, but I don't take everything.
If you don't need the fire for water filtration, do you need to build a fire if you think that you have warm enough, dry enough clothes?
The other aspect of the fire is the signaling. I would keep a fire going just for the signaling purposes. The smoke actually helps keep away the bugs too. But the key thing with the fire, in those circumstances where you're warm enough, it's warm enough, the ambient air temperature is warm enough, is the signaling aspect of that fire.
Someone was curious about some more details about the string shelter. They said that you described it that it wasn't just draped over the string, they thought, because you had said about water coming in. So how is it attached?
And that's a good question. It's hard to put that on a PowerPoint. I either use acorns or small pebbles, and I take the material and basically push the acorn up through both the clear plastic and the solar blanket, and push it up, and it makes a button, and then you wrap the cord around that, and then just tie it off there. That way you're not cutting into the plastic. It maintains its water protection. But making a button, I don't know if that makes sense, but that's basically what I do. And then I do the same to the other side. And whenever I get the 550 cord it's about 5 feet, across, I leave a little slack in it. And then when you tie it to the trees, you can pull it taut.
How long does water need to be boiled before it's safe to drink?
They say about 5 minutes of boiling makes it safe.
Would you recommend, if someone's lost in the woods, that they try to follow out a stream if they are trying to find their way out before it's a really bad survival?
I would. Even, following a stream out, if you got to keep in mind, you don't want to hurt yourself or injure yourself, making self-rescue a problem. But yeah, general rule of thumb, if you're close enough or you have a general idea where you're at, following any water out will help you. Or even at night, if you're maintaining the fire, listen for some road noise, or even look out in the horizon and see if you see any light from a city or not, and you can direct yourself or give yourself a good direction of travel from that.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Jason, for your presentation. And thank all of you for listening. I know we didn't get to all of the questions today, but if you would like to ask those questions, you can email us at pgccomments, COMMENTS, and we'll try to answer them that way. So this webinar has been recorded, and those of you who participated, it will be emailed to you, and it will also be placed on the Game Commission's YouTube channel. So we'd like to thank you again for joining us, and we hope that you will join us again for more webinars about Pennsylvania wildlife and hunting. Send us an email if you have a suggestion for another webinar topic. Until then, we hope that you're able to get outside and enjoy some of Pennsylvania's great outdoors.